Visual Studio 2022 Preview 1 was released recently. While I normally hold off on talking about preview releases and other items that are going to change rapidly, I think it's important to know what Visual Studio 2022 is all about so you know what to expect in the coming months. So in this video, we're going to see VS 2022 in action, we'll see what the new features are, and we'll talk about what this means for Visual Studio 2019 and your development in general. Now, if this is the first video you've watched of mine, my name is Tim Corey, and it's my goal to make learning C# easier. I provide videos twice a week here on YouTube to help you grow as a developer. I also have a full set of training courses on IamTimCorey.com. I encourage you to check out all the resources that I have to offer. Now let's get started by looking at the new version of Visual Studio. And if you're familiar with the 2019 edition, this is 2022, and it looks the same except for the fact that it says Visual Studio 2022. So yes, it's pretty much identical in how it looks, but let's go ahead and scroll down here and create a new project. And we're going to create a simple console application. We'll call it Console App 9, just because this is just to show off the actual environment, not worrying about the code itself. Now, note when I hit next, it says, hey, what framework do you want to use? And my only option is .NET 6 Preview. Well, that's because Visual Studio 2022 is going to be for going forward. It's for .NET 6 and beyond. It's not going to have .NET Core 3.1 or .NET Core or .NET 5 even, or .NET Framework. It's only going to work with the latest versions of .NET and forward. So if you're thinking, oh my goodness, that's horrible, don't worry, you can actually install this side by side with Visual Studio 2019 and have both still working, both installed, and you can use both of them and even have projects used in both of them. So you don't have to give up 2019 in order to get 2022. In fact, right now I have, I think, 3 major versions of Visual Studio. I have VS 2019 Community Edition, the regular version. I have the preview version, the newest cutting edge 2019 version, and now I have 2022 installed. They do not talk to each other. They don't step on each other's toes. They're totally separate. It's totally fine to install more than one version. Now, the benefit here of going only forward, this is kind of like what .NET Core did when it said, hey, we're going to dump all of the legacy stuff from .NET Framework and start over. That's kind of what we're doing here with Visual Studio. And in fact, the installation, I'm not sure if it's a final installation number or not, but the installation was about a quarter of the size of VS 2019. It was about 7 gig, which is still a lot, but it's nowhere near the 28 plus that I normally install. And those are rough numbers, and I'm sure they're going to change as things change in this development. But just note that it is a lot slimmer. So let's hit create. I want to get in here and I want you to see it first before we kind of talk about some of the benefits and how this is working, why it's so important. So this is 2022, and really the only way you can tell is where it says preview experimental, or if you go to help, about, and you see that it is in fact 2022. The big change is right down here, 64-bit. This is something that wasn't true in the previous iterations. 2019 still is 32-bit. In fact, let's bring up 2019 here, which looks the same. I've got Timco Retail Manager open here. We'll use that later. But if you go to Help About, this is 2019, and it doesn't say it anywhere, but it is 32-bit. Now, there is some confusion over what that means. So let's talk about what is 32-bit versus 64-bit. 32-bit applications can only access about 3.5 gigabytes of RAM. That's it. That's all they have access to use. Now, you may say, Tim, that's not true because I'm sure I've seen Visual Studio use more than that. Yes and no. So Visual Studio devenv.exe can only use 3.5, less than 4 gigabytes of RAM. But what the developers have done is push an awful lot of things into out of process executables. So they've moved things out of the main process, therefore kind of cheating or getting around that memory usage limit. Now, with modern applications and with modern desktops, we have more RAM available to us and we need more RAM. Yes, we want things to be as slim as possible and be as performant as possible and be as lightweight as possible. And really, VS Code does that great and it has the least amount possible loaded. But Visual Studio is all about building applications, and it really focuses on enterprise applications, or at least doing those well. And then you can build smaller applications as well and benefit from some of the features that enterprises need. But with that comes a lot of memory pressure because they want to do a lot of things. For example, we're going to see in a little bit the IntelliSense and how we can pull up different things and have it use some artificial intelligence to actually figure out what we want to say or do. Well, that is awesome. It makes our coding faster, but it takes memory. So with 64-bit, Visual Studio kind of unleashed. It's taken off of that pressure of you have to cram everything inside of this 3.5 or so gigabytes of RAM, which means that we're not going to get the out of memory exceptions that sometimes happened. It also means that Visual Studio can feel more performant just because it has access to more memory and can do less swapping in and out from the disk. So that's the big overarching massive change that is coming to Visual Studio 2022. And in fact, Preview 1, this is why it looks the same or practically the same as we have with VS 2019, is because Preview 1 is basically just about getting 64-bit in place. That's pretty much all they did. There's one other tweak, and that's the IntelliCode or IntelliSense and how they tell you what or offer up suggestions. We'll see that in a minute. But that's pretty much all there is difference. So if you're using this and say, hey, it looks pretty much the same, yeah, it pretty much does. This 64-bit version, the only real difference is the fact that it is, in fact, running 64-bit versus 32-bit. That's the big deal. Okay, so let's talk about another minor change, but one that you may really like. You go to Tools, Options, go down here to Fonts and Colors. Now I have installed a font sizer to make the fonts larger so you can see it on screen. By default, these are not that small, they're not that large. But notice the font choice is Cascadia Mono by default. If we go and look at 2019, we go to Tools, Options, and we go to Fonts and Colors, we'll see that it first of all locks right up. But we have Consolas as the default font of choice in 2019. So there are some slight tweaks. In fact, the Cascadia Mono can have font ligatures, which can make they make your fonts look a little different and better, especially in things where we have arrows and other things that we use two characters for. It kind of puts them together and makes them look better. So there's some, this is a way to have a little bit better of a font. It's a mono font, which is helpful for printing out and for other things, but it's also going to give us a nicer look and feel when you look at it. Now, I'm not a font snob. I don't really care what font is used, but this font is a little different than what we'd see in Visual Studio, just so you know. So that's a minor, in my opinion, minor tweak. You may love this font. That's cool. I'm glad for you. I don't really care. But there's a font change for you. We did talk about the fact that this is the .NET 6 project type, and that's all we're going to have is .NET 6. We're not going to go backwards into .NET 5 and beyond before. So you are going to have to move forward with this. You're not going to be able to stay on the older platforms. You have to move forward in the new .NET frameworks. But that's pretty much okay, because if you're going to be moving to VS 2022, you probably are going to be moving your code as well. Now, you may have to move your code. You're going to move your code first, but I've got videos on how to do that. And it's getting easier and easier. Once you get into .NET Core and beyond, it's a whole lot easier to upgrade your code to the latest versions. Now, I did mention that I have an extension installed. So I installed this font sizer extension. This extension actually went away for a while. The original creator of font sizer pulled all of their code off the web, even though it's open source. They pulled all of their extensions off. I'm not sure what happened. Basically, the person disappeared from the web. But Mads Christensen was able to take some older code that I'd found in GitHub, and he was able to tweak it and put it online and get it up to speed. So now we have the ability to, again, resize. Notice I can make my fonts larger. This is not Zoom. That's different. I can make my fonts larger for you, so you can see it more easily when I am demonstrating things. So, but that extension is working in 2022. So that's a key point right there. Not all extensions just come to new versions of Visual Studio. You have to do some updates to them. But the updates aren't that hard. So there's already documentation on how to move your extensions to 2022, and there's already help out there if you need it for moving your extension to 2022. So lots of great stuff here, and the transition to 2022 is not an overly hard one. That's good news, because if you rely on tools from, let's say, Telerik, well, Telerik already has tools in here for 2022. So they're already on the ball as far as getting their extensions up to date for the latest version of Visual Studio. So you won't be left waiting on third-party vendors, most likely. So that's another good feature in Visual Studio 2022. Okay, let's look at some code, because that's, I think, the important part whenever we're talking about a code editor or an IDE like this. So let's create a list of integer. Let's call it, I don't know, test. And notice when I hit space, it's grayed out there, so it may be a little harder to see on the screen, but we see that we have this. I'm going to zoom in here. We have as equals new list int and open close parentheses. I just need to hit tab and we'll fill that in. But I'm not going to do that. Okay, but that is the new format for this IntelliSense layout for us. So I'm going to say new and then open close my parentheses. Notice if I open my parentheses, I could put something in there, but open close, I'm going to create curly braces here. I'm going to say 1, comma. Notice it now says 2, 3, 4. If so, hit tab. How about 5, 6, 7? Sure, tab again. Tab one more time, I'm done. I'm going to hit enter. Okay, so, and then I'll put my semicolon down here, and it's going to format it nicely for me in my layout. So that was the new version of IntelliSense, where it's saying, hey, I'm going to give you some suggestions based upon what I think might go in here. Now, is this a demo list of integers? Sure. Is it going to be super useful in production? Probably not this. There's not often that we're going to have a list like this where you create 1 through 10, but maybe, who knows? But there are other suggestions out there we'll see that can be more useful. Now, notice also that my list of int is underlined in red. And you're saying, well, what's that? Well, if you look at the top, we only have one using statement. By default, the using statements, let's bring up Visual Studio 2020 or 2019. And if we create, let's create a new model right here. I'll delete it, but let's create a new model, and we're just going to say test model. And by default, we have 4 using statements. But in 2022, we don't. We have 1 that says, you know what, you're going to use system, but you might not use the other things. So we're going to leave that alone and not have any more than that. But that means that we don't have a using to give us list. We can do control dot or just a little light bulb and drop it down. Add the using for system.collections.generic. So that adds that by default whenever we select it. But that allows us to not have usings that we don't need. Now, is that a big deal? Some people love to, have tools to get rid of these things and make sure they don't have any unused usings and all the rest. They're not hurting anything, okay, for the most part. The only time they hurt something is if you have a naming conflict. So maybe you have, a name in 2 different namespaces that's the same. Well, you wouldn't want to bring the using in for both, just one, and that's where you'd cause a problem. But otherwise, it doesn't hurt anything. So having these does not make any difference as far as a compile time or build time or run time or anything. But it is nice to have a little bit cleaner of a look inside of our file. But that does mean we have to add in the usings that we need. Now, notice that I was able to do everything I needed to a list without having added that using statement. So it's still pretty intelligent as far as allowing me to do things without knowing the full scope of what's going on. So that's a really nice feature. Now let's create a new class. So you add a new class, and we're going to say this is the person model. And we'll make this public. I'm going to say prop string first name. Notice now when I hit enter, it says, hey, do you want a last name? Just hit tab. Hit enter. Hey, do you want an address? Hit tab. Hey, do you want a city? Tab. A region? Postal code? Country? Phone number? Fax number? No. And that kind of loops through, and that's a little bit messy. But it allows us to kind of create based upon the common patterns. So it's looked at projects across the web and it said, hey, here's the common patterns. If you see a first name in a model, you probably want last name and address and city and those kind of things. Now, is this going to be terribly useful all the time? No, because it's going to get things wrong. But it is a nice feature to have that suggestion that might be useful. And as we progress in Visual Studio, as they make tweaks to how it works and how it learns about these different things, it will get better and better as it starts to learn, hey, these are the things you want, or hey, you know what, that probably isn't what you were looking for, maybe this is. One of the things that right now doesn't really work that great is the fact that it only gives me one suggestion. It does not allow me to kind of cycle through them, or at least not that I have found. So if I were to, wipe this back out and like this, there's not a way to really say, okay, no, I don't want last name, but hey, give me a suggestion for address or for city, those kind of things. So if I hit the down arrow, that doesn't work. Bring that back up, control space brings that back up. But, are there other suggestions here? Probably, but I can't find them. So that's not ideal, but it is nice that we are starting to go down the road of, hey, let's make not just a suggestion for put get and set at the end of something, but give me the whole thing. And then, you know what? I could just tab through this and just change the names if I thought they're going to be different. So that's kind of a nice feature. It's really the beginning stages. It's not a feature complete feature, but it is at the beginning stages, and it is one big change that's inside of Visual Studio 2022. So that's a pretty cool feature. Now, let's look at one more model. So let's create a new one. And let's just say this is demo model is fine. Make it public. I'm not sure why I'm not public by default. But if I create a constructor, CTOR, and then let's put a few things in here. So string first name, string last name, string email, string street address, string city. I can hit control dot here to wrap every parameter like so. And then this is not a feature that is just Visual Studio 2022. This is actually in the latest versions of 2019 as well. But I want to show it to you because it's kind of modern. That's if we hit control dot here and say, create and assign remaining as properties. So if I do that, it's going to create first name, last name, email, street address, and city properties, and then assign the values based upon the parameters being passed in. But not only that, notice that street address, lowercase s, uppercase a. Street address, uppercase A or S, uppercase A. It has changed the naming based upon common conventions. So really cool stuff there. That's pretty neat in itself. But this is something that's in the latest versions of 2019, but it's pretty cutting edge. So I want to show it to you. If I say set, that's one. Come down here and say, oh, that's set as well. Notice it's hard to see, but right there's a little ellipsis. All right. If I do control dot here or click on the little light bulb, it says, hey, there's IntelliCode suggestions based upon my recent edits. Apply all suggestions. It kind of goes off the page, which is kind of a bummer here. But what it's saying is apply the 3 suggestions to the type in this document. Now watch, email address, street address, and city only have get. If I click this, now they all have set. Because it said, hey, you put a set on first and last name, you probably want to put that on the rest of them. Is that true? You say, yep, and just goes and does it. So it looks at the latest edits you've made and says, hey, I'm seeing a pattern here, and I can do patterns. Would you like me to just do the pattern for you? And you say yes, and your tool is doing a lot of the work for you. And it's giving you a preview so you can kind of see it. Now that preview went off the screen. That's because of my font sizes. Still something that they need to work on. But again, the biggest change in 2022 is just the 64-bit. They haven't made actual 2022 changes to the editor, the IDE, and all the rest. Those are coming. We've got new icons. We've got much better accessibility tools built right into 2022 and so on. So lots of changes coming, but those aren't here yet. So the way it works in 2019 is pretty much the way it works in 2022 as far as those layouts and other things go. I'm hoping that those layouts will change as we move forward into 2022. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be submitting a feature request, probably a feature request, but we'll see. I'm going to talk to some people first and get suggestions. But it may be a bug, it may be a feature request, depends on how you look at it. But that's an important note, is that if you're going to use 2022, you really need to help the team out. I mean, just installing it is helping the team out. That's awesome. But use this little icon up here. Let's zoom in right here. Okay, it's a little person with looks like a speech bubble, but it's so tiny. But click on this and it's going to say, hey, do you want to report a problem or suggest a feature or even give my feedback? And any of those brings up a tool. Let me sorry, can't pop in the other screen. Let's do it again. So suggest a feature. Okay. And it's going to say, okay, you're requesting a feature. Please add the title. It's going to search to make sure that there's not already a suggestion like that, description, and so on. And then you can share what you want to see in 2022 or share what bug you found in 2022 so that the team knows and they can hopefully address those problems. I said it before, but be very clear in your title. Make sure that your description is clear as well and has as much detail as possible. Please make sure you search first to make sure it's not a similar suggestion or bug report already in the system, and only put one idea per suggestion. But that right there is going to really help the team as they try and move forward. Making this much of a change is going to cause bugs. If you see a bug, say something. Tell somebody. Not just me. Don't tell me. I'm not Microsoft. I have no power to change these things. But submit a feedback report. Yes, the team does look at them. Yes, they do read them. Yes, they do evaluate them. And this is very, very helpful to them. Because otherwise, you'll be sitting here complaining about the fact that thing doesn't work for years. Because if no one says anything, no one knows it's broken. So don't rely on Microsoft to do all this testing to find every single potential bug. They can't find every bug. They do a great job of finding most of them. But do your part and point that out. Okay, so there's some really cool stuff in here for this. Let's do this. Gonna save here. Let me close out the solution. I'm gonna open up the Timco Retail Manager. Now this is a copy. So I made a copy of it just in case it messed anything up. It won't, but just in case, because preview, okay? And that's kind of an important point here. The preview edition of 2022 is not licensed to create production applications in. Don't mess with it for your production applications. That's why I made a copy of the Timco Retail Manager. It's technically a production application. And while Microsoft wouldn't care if I did it on screen and showed you how it still works and use it from then on, really, that's not what it's designed for. And if there's a problem and it messed up my code badly, that's kind of on me, because it's for testing. It's for trying things out. It's for demos. It's not yet for production use. So just note that. That's why I made a copy of it. But this is 2019 of the Timco Retail Manager. Again, notice Preview EXP. That indicates the 2022 version. And then I have the 2019 version here as well. So I have two versions of Visual Studio open. One is the preview version. One is the 2019 version. I'll pull this up and notice that right now, let's zoom in here. So right now, this is the 32-bit 2019. We're using 917 megabytes of RAM. This is the preview version for 2022, which it does not say 32-bit, it says 64-bit. And it's using slightly more at 1 gig. Now, this can wildly fluctuate. So don't just say, oh, it's only 10% more or 12% more. No, it's not quite like that. These numbers will change, but just want to point this out that it's not crazy different. It's not like you're seeing massive differences of 10 times as much memory because all of a sudden it's 64-bit and we can use as much as we want, so go crazy. That's not what it's doing. But you will see larger numbers probably in 2022 at some point as Visual Studio kind of relaxes and goes, we don't have to swap things in and out. We don't have to pretend like we're only using 3 gig when in fact we're using 8 gig, but in 5 different processes. So you may see that number inflate more. That's not really the important part. Now, I know that some of you get really uptight about, hey, we want it as small as possible. That's not VS Code small. No, it's not. This is an enterprise tool used to build, design, and run massive applications. And it's designed to help you do that with as much tooling as possible. Things like the IntelliCode code we saw, that code completion, that doesn't come for free. But that's going to help me build my code faster. So it says, hey, you know what? You're probably going to be building code as your primary thing on your computer when you're building code. Therefore, we can take up more memory without feeling bad. Okay? So, and that's what we're going to do. They're going to take up more memory in order to help you be more efficient. Because if your computer is running at 80% capacity versus 20% capacity, it doesn't really affect your life. But if you're operating at 80% capacity versus 20% capacity, that does affect your life. If you can operate faster, if you can write code faster, then you can get out of work earlier, or you can get more work done, or you can clear the backlog easier and faster. Those kind of things are important, which is why your tooling should be focused on making you more productive, not necessarily making your computer more productive. So you'll see these numbers change, and you may see a doubling of the RAM at some points, depending on what it's doing from 2019 to 2022. That's okay. As long as it's not bogging your computer down and making it totally unusable, which is counterproductive, and it shouldn't. In fact, 2022 seems to be faster and easier on the memory, but that's just an anecdotal look. But unless it's really slowing your computer down, let it do its thing. Okay. Now, percentage-wise, ignore my computer. Okay, my computer is not the typical machine. So percentage-wise, ignore those. The key here is a focus on the megabytes and gigabytes it's using. Okay, so let's zoom back out. Let's close this out, and let's just talk about. So let's get rid of the test model real quick. So now we don't have any changes now to Git, but let's open up the actual application user model. Nope, sorry, not that. Controllers. There we go, user controller. So in here, I've got this line right here, which to create this, I would say user model t equals new, and I'd say ID equals existing user dot ID, first name equals user dot first name, last name equal, and you get the idea, right? That's the typical process. Let's go over to 2022. Let's close this out and go over that same user controller. Let's scroll down to it, and we're gonna do the same thing. So user model t equals new. I'm gonna say, let's start with, I found this in my testing, I found this to be a little bit better demo-wise, which is something that they're gonna improve on, I'm sure. The order was kind of important. But so first name equals user dot first name, comma, say enter first. Last name, suggestion already, enter. Email address, sure, comma. I'm gonna say ID equals existing user dot ID, yep. And then notice we have create date, which that was popping up before, equals, and we have a suggestion for datetime.utc now, which I really appreciate. It's suggesting, hey, put the create date as now, but use the UTC version, which is going to be the time zone independent version, so that you can always know exactly what time it is locally based upon UTC and then modifying for your local time zone. So UTC is a kind of a better version of a datetime.now. But notice how quick that was, and really could have been quicker if I didn't have existing user versus user. And so all those suggestions, and I would need that, but all the suggestions came from it inferring based upon what you had. So I had a user object and it goes, oh, hey, you've got a user object that's got first name, last name, and email address in it, and this model has first name, last name, and email address in it. I'm guessing those two line up. So let's go ahead and make those suggestions. And it did work, and it was supposed to be that way. And yes, I do it a little bit different, and I hadn't put create date down here, but that was a nice suggestion as well. So really cool stuff, really cool how it set that up and made me faster based upon how I was coding in my code based upon how my code is structured. So really cool stuff there. Okay, so let me go ahead and undo those changes. I'll just undo changes and let's make sure there's no other changes in our projects. But that's pretty much the end of what I wanted to show you. Let's undo that change as well. Git is awesome. If you don't know how to use Git. Learn how to use Git. I do have a video on that. Intro to Git, I believe is the title, that walks you through what is Git, how it's useful as source control, because it really makes doing testing and trying things out and not being afraid a whole lot easier. Rolling back problems, super easy. So, but that's Visual Studio 2022. Now I've used Community Edition, but all 3 editions are available for free to try out. Again, you cannot use them in production. They're not licensed for that. But if you want to try out enterprise features, just in case you're an enterprise customer already for 2019, go ahead and do that 2022. Don't feel like you can't install 2022 because you don't want to mess something up with 2020 or 2019. It will install side by side without a problem. They don't conflict. Okay, those conflicts are a thing of the past. They install in separate locations. The installation is a lot smaller than 2019, which is awesome. Try these things out. Notice that you will be using the preview version of .NET 6. Yes, you'll see some new cool stuff in here about that, but really kind of hold off, I would suggest, on trying to plan out real applications for .NET 6. I know the idea is there, the desire to have the cutting edge, latest cool stuff is there. And you look at 2019 and go, man, that looks so old now. I want 2022. I want .NET 6. Let's do it now because it's all out here, right? I'm sure it'll still work. And even if it does work, don't do it. The reason why is because things are rapidly changing. The only reason I showed off 2022 at this point is because I want to go over what the 64-bit change is all about and what's happening and how we're going to move forward. I am not encouraging you to use this on a daily basis. This is just for those who like to be on the cutting edge and knowing what's coming. Because everything here will probably change more than once before it's actually released. As to the actual release date, I don't believe Microsoft has given a release date yet on 2022. The name would suggest that it will be out in 2022. My guess is they'll want it out earlier in 2022 versus later. I mean, if you release a product that is too close to the next year, you usually want to name it the next year because it just feels newer. So I'm guessing they're not going to release it in the last quarter of 2022. My guess is before then, the production version, the release version will be out for 2022. But until then, there will be new versions with new major changes, cool stuff to try out and see. I probably won't be doing videos on all of them just because it's hard to show off something that may look different in a month. I don't want you to always be looking at, trying to learn what's coming when that's a shifting landscape. We've got enough of a shifting landscape with coding, even with just learning what's existing and what's production ready code. .NET 5 hasn't been out for that long, but before that was .NET 3.1, before that was .NET 3, and before that it was .NET 2.1 before Core. So lots of changes have happened just in production ready stuff. Trying to plan for the future is one thing. but trying to memorize and learn how everything works before it's out is kind of a waste of time. With that, I have also not covered .NET 6 hardly at all on my channel, and there's a reason for that. .NET 6, also known as MAUI, is coming out during that time. There's been a lot of buzz around it, and people want me to do videos on it. It's not ready yet. There are changes still happening in how it's going to work. The bits are still preview versions. They're not release candidates yet. I believe a release candidate might be coming out or might be out for part of it. I'm not positive. But that won't be out in production until November of 2021. So wait. Don't get ahead of yourself. Do not put your production code in .NET 6. Just hold off, because there are too many breaking changes that happen even right before launch to ever risk it. So don't go there yet. And I'm not going to teach on it yet. I may show some, hey, what's coming in general terms, but not in specific terms, because of the fact that I don't want you, again, learning something and trying to learn a pattern that's going to change in 2 weeks or a month. So just note that it's a big milestone coming up. I can't wait for it. We'll have a launch party, probably something like that, around that launch event in November. But until then, kind of hold off on doing production stuff or really doing too much in-depth stuff, unless you're just trying to, test things out and test the waters. Okay. Same thing in 2022 of Visual Studio. Try it out, and see what you like, how it works. Submit bug reports if you find bugs. Give suggestions in the feature request list, but don't spend the majority of your time here. Still focus on 2019. And speaking of 2019, that brings up a point that I'm sure someone will ask, and that is Visual Studio 2019 dead? And the answer is absolutely not. In fact, when I opened up 2019 in order to show off this demo, I don't know if you noticed, but there's a red 1 here next to my notifications. That means that version 16.10.2 is now available. So there's a new version of Visual Studio available that's production ready even now. So even though they're working on 2022, 2019 is still getting updates. It still will get updates for a long time. So it's not dead. It still be highly useful, especially for .NET 5 and before. So .NET Framework, early .NET Cores, .NET 5, those are all used on 2019. It's .NET 6 and above that will be on 2022. So some big differences there, kind of a dividing line. So yes, we'll still see Visual Studio 2019 being useful for a very long time. Also note that 2019 Community Edition is free for life, as long as you fit into a certain few criteria. But it's basically, if your business makes less than $1 million a year and you have 5 or less developers, or you're on your own, either of those are true, then it's free for life. 2022 will have the same model. So don't worry about the fact that, oh no, I have 2019, I can't, I don't want to have the expense of upgrading. If you're using Community Edition, it will still be free. And Community Edition is pretty much the same as Professional Edition. The difference is the licensing. So if you have to pay for it, then you get Professional. Otherwise, if you don't have to pay for it, you use Community. So just note that they're very generous with allowing us to use Visual Studio for free, even if you're using it for production use. So if you're making a profit off the applications you build in Visual Studio, unless your company is making $1 million a year, you don't have to pay anything for Visual Studio. All right, I think that's everything I need to cover for Visual Studio 2022 Preview 1. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope that For some of you, I hope that this allowed you to see it without having to install it and try it out. For others that are going to install it and try it out, I hope I set good expectations of what to expect from Preview 1. If you want to see massive changes, wait for Preview 2 at least, all right? But hopefully you got some value out of this. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions or thoughts on 2022 or on .NET 6 or the direction that Microsoft is going or anything else. I'd love to hear it and interact with you. All right, thanks for watching. And as always, I am Tim Corey.